Blog Talk Radio. Welcome to the Institute for Personal Development, Kriya Yoga Ashram, where total consciousness is the new frontier.
Kriya Yoga is union of the individual with the divine. Join us as we explore the practices to initiate this process.
Good morning. Welcome to the Voice of Yoga. Let's Talk Consciousness. I am your hostess, Lisa Winton, and with me is Kenny Toy, also known as Swami Jayananda, founder of the Institute for Personal Development, located here in Hampton, New Hampshire. Good morning, Swami. Thank you for being here today. How are you?
Good morning. I'm doing pretty good today. How about you?
I'm doing pretty great today. Thanks for asking. And I want to thank you, listeners, also for tuning in. Today on the Voice of Yoga, we will be talking about the split between science and religion. We will discuss the ramification of this conflict on both disciplines and listen as Swami demonstrates the practical application of this essential union. Albert Einstein said, "Science without religion is lame. Religion without science is blind." Kriya Yoga is a holistic health management system founded on the union of religion and science. Welcome to the Voice of Yoga. We are talking consciousness. Join the Kriya Yoga Spiritual Advance to get the light in your soul to experience wholeness. So, Swami, let's start off and let's discuss the ramification of the conflict of these two disciplines. What is your take on that?
I think the split between science and religion, and from my understanding, I think where that happened, which was interesting, was it actually happened it was the church that started to persecute the early physicists who had basically discovered that spirituality isn't magic, it's physics, it's a science. I think by that time, the church had become somewhat convoluted and distorted, and I don't really think we had a grasp on the goals and objectives of religion. The church, anyway, was threatened by these discoveries. What happened with that, I think our religions have failed enormously, because without scientific application, our religions are really reduced to belief systems, and they're no longer demonstrable. And we start to substitute this intellectual, devotional mirage for true spiritual reality. But I think also what happened was our sciences became empirical. And we started to say that anything that wasn't verifiable through the senses no longer had any validity. And now with the discoveries of quantum physics, we've gone 360 degrees and we're kind of back to the whole concept of the importance of the Trinity, that reality is multidimensional. From a scientific standpoint, underlying matter is energy, and underlying energy is the void, the absolute.
Well, it's interesting that you say that, because when I was researching for today's program, of course I used my friend Google, and I put in science and religion quotes, and I clicked on a link, and it must have had like 166 different quotes, and they were all by scientists. And a lot of them were quantum physicists, actually. And I have a few here that I wanted to share with you. And one of them is, this is done by Joseph Taylor, and he is a scientist. And he says, a scientific discovery is also a religious discovery. There is no conflict between science and religion. Our knowledge of God is made larger with every discovery we make about the world. And I thought that was pretty telling.
Yeah, and again, I mean, it's really hard to determine what they mean by the term God. I really like, just the generic concept that underlying matter is energy, and underlying energy is the void or the absolute, the one, which is the underpinnings of true reality.
Now, the Albert Einstein quote that we have in the summary, science without religion is lame, and religion without science is blind. What is your theory behind that statement? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think he's 100% right, that they really belong together. I kind of like what David Bohm said, and because he believes that our almost universal tendency to fragment the world and ignore the dynamic interconnectedness of all things is responsible for many of our problems, not only in science, but in our lives and our society as well. For instance, we believe we can extract the valuable parts of the earth without affecting the whole. We believe it is possible to treat parts of our body and not be concerned with the whole. We believe we can deal with various problems in our society, such as crime, poverty, and drug addictions, without addressing the problems in our society as a whole, and so on. In his writings, Bohm argues passionately that our current way of fragmenting the world into parts not only doesn't work, but it may even lead to our extinction. These are really important discoveries these scientists are making, but what I also find somewhat disturbing is what little is being done with them as far as, and I really think it's because of our lack of understanding of the role of religion in human development.
You always say that Kriya Yoga is a science. Why do you, or what makes it a science?
It's a science because it's demonstrable. You are working with changes that you make that have an evidence procedure. The process of the human becoming divine, this thing called apotheosis, has tangible and observable guidelines. And that when you separate from your attachment to one dimension of reality, particles or waves, matter or mind, and you join with this indivisible unified state, this whole thing of the causal spiritual dimension, there is physics that takes place. There are changes that happen, this spiritualization of your thoughts that actually changes who you are, that we literally become spirit. And then, of course, to really start to unbox the value of knowing that you are an eternal spiritual being, as opposed to a body that has a mind and perchance a soul.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned mind, because I have a quote here by a physicist, Freeman Dysart, and he says, "The universe is also weird with its laws of nature that make it hospitable to the growth of mind." And then he goes on to say, "I do not make any clear distinction between mind and God. God is what mind becomes when it passes beyond the scale of our comprehension." So I wanted to kind of get your thoughts about how he uses the concept of mind in that statement.
Yeah, very important that there is a difference between mind and brain. There's a difference between what we call in yoga lower mind and higher mind. So he's understanding consciousness has degrees of awareness. And we also have levels of consciousness. So there are variables. And that's why I really like the Kriya Yoga that we teach, because we really plug into this process. That matter and mind come together with new information. You take a mind that is initially the size of a quarter, your conscious mind, and you impregnate the seed of it, and then that starts to expand. And as your field of awareness increases, with that comes your scope of power, that your identity transcends the limits of seeing yourself as separate, and then you move into the realms of the Almighty, this whole thing of God that we've basically taken out of the equation today.
Well, we've been talking in other shows about the mortal mind and divine mind, and the same physicist also poses a question here: what is the meaning or purpose of life? He says, I can only answer with another question. Do you think we are wise enough to read God's mind? So that made me think about divine mind. And then do we know, can we really read God's mind? Do we have to be at a certain level of consciousness to be able to connect with that?
Right. I mean, these are all great questions. And from a Kriya Yoga perspective, the whole concept of divine law seeking expression is the will of God, the mind of God. The whole concept of being in harmony with that. So one of the things that I find really helpful, the application of spiritual science. And I really like what Mary Baker Eddy did with Christian Science. Her work, Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures. And what she says here, I think, is really fabulous. The universe, like man, is to be interpreted by science from its divine principle, God, and then it can be understood. But when explained on the basis of physical sense and represented as subject to growth, maturity, and decay, the universe, like man, is and must continue to be an enigma. So in order for us to really understand ourselves, we really have to understand this thing called God. We have to understand ourselves truly spiritually. Otherwise, what we're looking at, what we draw from our senses is just a counterfeit of who we really are.
Yeah, that's a really good quote to try to unbox all of that. I like the fact that she's talking about the physical sense representing as subject to growth, maturity, and decay, like the universe, and then she compares man with the universe, and that we're all an enigma.
Right, but what she's also saying is that we're accustomed to understanding the universe just by the tangible parts, the parts that are verifiable through our senses. I want to say the real knowledge of the universe is found in the invisible, intangible. It's the incorporeal aspect of reality, the concept of spirit, the invisible part of reality, is where true understanding is found.
I'd like to take this opportunity to give you another quote that I'd like to get your opinion on, and it is, it may seem bizarre, but in my opinion, science offers a surer path to God than religion. And that's also by a physicist named Paul Davies. A surer path to God than religion.
Right. I would totally agree with that based on our understanding of what we think religion is today, because the institutions that have taken over our religions have failed so badly that, like I said, we're now substituting this intellectual devotional mirage for true spiritual reality. Spirituality isn't magic, but it is physics. And when you start to enlist strategies that change the shape, the composition, the condition of your physical body, that change how you think, how you feel, and how you perform, and they're all based on a very specific dynamic that you're trying to resonate to a frequency of a completely different dimension of reality, that you start to see that we are transmitting, receiving instruments, and that by making changes, employing strategies, and by joining with invisible, intangible source of sustenance, that we actually change ourselves on all of these different levels. And that's not magic, but it is science.
Well, I think that's a good place to pause right there to hear a word from our sponsors. So listeners, we'll be back with you in a few moments. Kriya Yoga Theory 2 is a unique and revolutionary practice and forum designed to facilitate the growth process in human development. Hostess is a real experience and has an evidence procedure. You cannot lead someone to permanent change by doing for them what they must do themselves. Personal accountability and responsibility are the foundation of Kriya Yoga Theory 2. You must be engaged and devoted. Prana power brings virtue to overcome fear, wisdom to overcome ignorance, purpose to overcome selfishness, enthusiasm to overcome laziness. Kriya Yoga is a path of action, knowledge, and devotion. These sessions are a celestial positioning system to guide the individual into union with the divine. For more information or to sign up for your next session online, go to www.ipdtransform.com. Namaste. Welcome back. For those of you just joining us, you're listening to The Voice of Yoga, and we are talking consciousness. So, Swami, to get back to some of the quotes that I got from Google, quotes from scientists regarding religion and God, I have two here that I would like to say. And the first one is by Albert Einstein, and he says, "The more I study science, the more I believe in God." And then there's another quote, too, that I have from Lord William Kelvin, and he says, "If you study science deep enough and long enough, it will force you to believe in God." So I think it's very interesting that we have scientists that are trying to make this connection between science and a connection to God.
Yeah, I would agree with that 100%. But I also think that when you have a scientific approach to your religion, that you no longer believe in God, that your spirituality becomes demonstrable. And that's one of the things that I really like about Christian Science, that you can start to use your body as a barometer to see just how spiritually understanding or spiritually knowing am I. Because there are laws that are at work on a spiritual level that if we know them, then we can demonstrate them. And of course, that will have an evidence procedure to it. That's what makes it scientific.
I have here another quote from the same scientist, Lord William Kelvin, and he says, "People take it for granted that the physical world is both ordered and intelligible. The underlying order in nature, the law of physics, are simply accepted as given, as brute facts. Nobody asks where they came from. At least they do not do so in polite company. However, even the most atheistic scientist accepts as an act of faith that the universe is not absurd, that there is a rational basis to physical existence manifested as law-like order in nature that is at least partly comprehensible to us." Then he says, "So science can proceed only if the scientist adopts an essentially theological worldview." So it sounds like he's saying that because of the natural law that surrounds us, you almost have to have this theological view to be able to study it further.
Yeah, and then I also think that as you move through different dimensions of reality, that the rules start to change. The laws that govern particles, say, for example, are different than the laws that are at work in waves. And then, of course, when we get into the realms of non-locality, everything is happening at once. Everything changes again. And again, if you have a more spiritual approach to your science and you've opened yourself up to the workings of the Trinity, then you increase your knowledge base and you increase your chances of being able to understand life or creation in general. And I really like what Michael Talbert said in The Holographic Universe, and this was on page 80. This is an astounding notion. Virtually all of our common sense prejudices about the world are premise that subject and objective reality are very much separate. That is why synchronicities seem so baffling and inexplicable to us. But if there is ultimately no division between the physical world and our inner psychological processes, then we must be prepared to change more than just our common sense understanding of the universe, for the implications are staggering. One implication is that objective reality is more like a dream than we have previously suspected. So again, that the physical world isn't quite as solid as Western science originally started out to think. And so again, the more that we can start to see the spiritualization or the role of spirit in reality, because the underlying dynamic of everything is that the sum of the parts don't equal the whole.
When he says that we must be prepared to change more than just our common sense understanding of the universe, that's where Kriya Yoga comes in, because isn't that exactly what we try to do, is have this understanding of the whole.
Right, and then also it's a practical guide for highly effective living. But what you start to see is the role of spirit in human development. You start to see the role of spirit in relationship in general, and how having this broader sense of self, and it is a change. We actually have to change from a personal sense of I to a spiritual sense of selfhood that is impersonal. But when we do that, then we become something different. And it has a huge effect on us physically, but then also psychologically and conceptually. And in Kriya Yoga, we say that this is a practical guide for highly effective living. Because you move from being the victim that everything is happening to the reflection of divine law seeking expression.
Well, Ernest Walton is another physicist, and he said, one way to learn the mind of the Creator is to study His creation. We must pay God the compliment of studying His work of art, and this should apply to all realms of human thought. A refusal to use our intelligence honestly is an act of contempt for Him, capital H, who gave us that intelligence. I think that's a very interesting quote as well, and again how he used the word human thought should apply to all realms of human thought.
Right. And again, that's from a scientific approach, but from a spiritual approach, that there is actually a shift, that we go from human thinking to spiritual knowing. And I like what Mary Baker Eddy says in Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures. She says that spirit is the life, substance, and the continuity of all things. We tread on forces, withdraw them, and creation must collapse. Human knowledge calls them forces of matter, but divine science declares that they belong wholly to divine mind, are inherent in this mind, and so restores them to their rightful home and classification. The human mind, or what we call the lower mind, which is directly related to our senses, can only report things that are dualistic, which are provisional. And they're tangible. They are only relative to the absolute. And it is the higher mind, it is spiritual sense that can only report truth. And the thing that's really important to understand here is that truth is divine law, which is not dualistic. It is not a mix of good and evil. It can only be harmonious. It is experienced as, and again, looking for using external reinforcement to see how it is that we're thinking. You look basically for spiritual qualities, which would be peace, love, happiness, goodness, perfect health. These are the indicators that you really want to start to look at based on my level of consciousness, my degree of awareness. Because you're only going to be able to demonstrate what it is that you know or have understanding of.
So we have to have a full understanding of what truth really does mean. Now, in order to do that, to have this understanding, do you suggest daily readings of the Bible, or how is one to really educate themselves on what the truth is before they can demonstrate it?
Right, because this is a very important thing that you actually have to become spiritual. It's a realization that if you just academically know it, as opposed to become spiritual, then you will only have a belief in it. But if you know it and you understand it, then you can apply it. And then all of the things that the books talk about is the all-knowing, the all-presence, the almighty, the all-powerful concept of your divinity will now have completely different meaning for you, because you will be in harmony with it. You will be able to apply it. You'll be able to demonstrate it. And that's the true workings of religion. And of course, this would be scientific application of it, because you can actualize it. You demonstrate it. You become spiritual.
So we don't necessarily need to have an organized religion to be able to learn the truth and to demonstrate it.
No, but we have to understand the word religion means to relink. That independent of how you go about doing it, you have to, and the Bible calls this putting off the old man and putting on the new man, kind of a thing, or they call it the new covenant in the Old Testament. And in yoga, this whole thing of divide and conquer before you unite and stand, that we have to separate from our attachment to a very limiting source of sustenance and then join with this more reliable source of sustenance. And when we are totally connected to the sustaining infinite, and matter and mind have now come together with this source of sustenance, that's what we call the physics of spirituality. Because the transformation in the true sense of the word happens.
So it's about that time we have to start closing down our show for this morning. So listeners, I invite you out there to visit our website, www.ipdtransform.com. So once you're there, you can make comments about this show or give us ideas for future shows you'd like us to do. But keep those comments coming, because we do enjoy hearing from you. Next week, we'll be celebrating Martin Luther King Day, or in New Hampshire, we call it Civil Rights Day. And also be sure to listen to our weekly Facebook Live episodes that we do Wednesdays at 5 p.m. So, Swami, do you have any other thoughts about science and religion before we sign off?
Well, I would like to wish everybody luck with their connection between science and religion. And with that, I'll wish everybody a good day. Namaste.
And thank you for listening to our program, The Voice of Yoga. This is Lisa Winton, along with Swami Jayananda, signing off. Have a wonderful Kriya Yoga kind of day. Namaste.